He walked in at midnight with another woman on his arm, expecting tears. What he got was silence. His boring housewife didn't even look up from her orchids. He had no idea he was standing in a penthouse he didn't own, about to humiliate the woman who signed his paychecks. And his mistress? She was about to recognize her own boss. Welcome to a story about power, pride, and the price of underestimating the quiet ones. Before we begin, I want to say this. May you always know your worth before someone else tries to define it for you. May you build empires in silence and let your success make the noise. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, I'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button and tap the like. It tells me you're ready for more stories where the silent ones win. Now, let's watch a man destroy himself in the most spectacular way possible. The brass key scraped against the lock at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Victoria Laurent heard it from the conservatory, where she sat with pruning shears in one hand and a dying orchid in the other. The sound was deliberate, loud enough to announce itself, slow enough to feel like a threat. She didn't look up. The door swung open. Two sets of footsteps crossed the marble foyer, one heavy and familiar, the other lighter, hesitant, heels, expensive ones. The click-click-click echoed off the vaulted ceiling like gunshots in slow motion. "Victoria?" Her husband's voice carried across the penthouse, casual, almost bored. "We're home." She set the shears down on the iron table beside her, the metal ringing softly. The orchid was beyond saving. Root rot. She'd waited too long to cut away the damage. Through the glass walls of the conservatory, the city sprawled below. 10 million lights, 10 million people who had no idea who lived on the 73rd floor of the Kensington Tower. Footsteps approached. Victoria finally turned. Damien Laurent stood in the doorway, 6'2" in a charcoal suit that had been tailored on Savile Row 3 months ago. She remembered signing the receipt. His hair was still dark at 41, expensively cut to hide the places where silver had started to thread through. Beside him stood a woman Victoria didn't recognize. Mid-20s, red dress that clung like paint, dark hair swept over one bare shoulder. The woman's eyes were wide, undrinking in the conservatory with its floor-to-ceiling windows and the indoor fountain that cost $40,000 to install. "Victoria, this is Natasha Reeves." Damien's hand rested on the small of the woman's back, possessive. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Victoria looked at the woman, Natasha, for 3 full seconds. Then she looked back at the orchid. "The guest suite hasn't been aired out in 6 months, Victoria said. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that made boardrooms go silent. "The sheets will smell like storage." Damien laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "She won't be sleeping in the guest suite." Silence. The fountain burbled. Somewhere in the penthouse, the climate control system hummed, keeping the temperature at exactly 68 degrees. Victoria stood. She was 40, though most people guessed younger. No Botox, no fillers, just good genes and the kind of bone structure that aged like architecture. She wore grey linen pants and a white cashmere sweater, both understated, both more expensive than anything in Natasha's closet. Her wedding ring caught the light. 3 carats, emerald cut, set in platinum. She'd designed it herself. "I see," Victoria said. Natasha's eyes darted between them. The woman's perfume was too heavy, too sweet. It clashed with the orchids. "Is that all you're going to say?" Damien stepped forward, his jaw tight. I bring another woman into our home, and you say, I see. Victoria picked up the dead orchid by its stem. The roots hung limp, grey and soft with decay. What would you like me to say? I want you to react, Victoria. For once in your life, I want you to act like a human being instead of a robot. His voice rose. I want you to scream, cry, throw something, feel something. She looked at him, really looked, at the vein pulsing in his temple, at the way his hands had curled into fists, at Natasha, still frozen in the doorway, her red dress suddenly looking cheap under the conservatory lights. Would that make you happy? Victoria asked. It would make you human. She walked past them, orchid in hand, toward the kitchen. Her bare feet made no sound on the heated marble. Behind her, she heard Damien exhale, sharp and frustrated. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he called after her. You're empty, Victoria, a beautiful, boring shell. Do you know what Natasha does? She's a vice president at Meridian Global, 26 years old, and already running a division. Yeah, she's ambitious, driven. She has fire. Victoria reached the kitchen, all white marble and stainless steel, designed by a Danish architect who'd won 3 international awards. She dropped the orchid into the trash compactor. How nice for her, she said. The kitchen island stretched 12 feet, a single slab of Calcutta marble with veins like lightning. Victoria filled a crystal tumbler with filtered water, the kind that came from a tap that cost more to install than most people's cars. She drank slowly, aware that Damien and Natasha had followed her. They stood near the entrance to the kitchen, backlit by the hallway sconces. You're not even going to ask why. Damien's voice had gone cold now. Controlled. This was the tone he used in negotiations, when he wanted someone to know they'd already lost. Victoria set the glass down. The base made a soft clink against the marble. Why what? Why I brought her here? Why I'm doing this? I assume you have your reasons. Natasha shifted her weight, the movement small and uncomfortable. Victoria noticed the woman's shoes, Louboutins last season, the soles barely scuffed, new money trying to look like old money. Damien's laugh was bitter. That's it. That's exactly it. You assume. You don't care enough to even ask. He moved closer, his reflection sliding across the polished cabinet doors. I've spent 12 years married to a ghost. You drift through this penthouse like you're not really here. No passion, no anger, no life. I'm standing right in front of you. Are you? Because I look at you and I see nothing. When was the last time you raised your voice? When was the last time we had a real conversation about anything that mattered? He gestured around the kitchen. You spend your days doing what exactly? Watering plants? Reading? Attending charity luncheons where you smile and nod and write checks? Victoria's fingers rested on the cool marble. She could feel the subtle variations in the stone, the places where the veins ran deeper. I stay busy, she said. Busy? Damien's voice cracked with something like genuine frustration. Natasha closed a $40 million acquisition last month. She works 70-hour weeks. She's building something. What have you built, Victoria? What have you done with your life besides spend my money? My money. The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria looked at Natasha. The younger woman's face had gone pale, and 2 spots of color high on her cheekbones. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Natasha, Victoria said quietly, what division do you run at Meridian Global? The woman blinked. The Asia-Pacific Consumer Products Division. How long have you been with the company? 18 months. Natasha's voice was barely audible. And before that, I was at Rothschild's, in corporate finance. Victoria nodded slowly. The Rothschild group that handles mergers and acquisitions for tech startups. Yes, Damien cut in. See, Natasha has ambition. She's not content to just exist. She's making her mark on the world. He moved to stand beside Natasha, his hand finding hers. She reminds me what it's like to be with someone who's actually alive. Victoria turned back to her water glass. The kitchen lights reflected off its surface, creating small rainbows where the crystal was cut. I've given you everything, Damien continued. His voice had taken on a rehearsed quality, like he'd practiced this speech. This penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the villa in Lake Como. Your credit cards have no limits. You wear clothes that cost more than most people make in a year. And what do I get in return? A wife who can't even pretend to care that I'm standing here with another woman. What would you like me to do, Damien? I want a divorce. There it was, the real reason. Victoria had been waiting for it since she heard the key in the lock. All right, she said. Damien's eyes narrowed. All right? That's all you have to say? What else is there? The prenup, Victoria. You remember the prenup? He smiled, and it wasn't kind. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing. Every asset is in my name. Every account. This penthouse, the cars, the properties, all mine. You sign the papers, you walk away with your clothes, and whatever personal items you can prove you owned before we married. Victoria picked up her water glass, finished the last swallow, set it down in exactly the same spot, the condensation ring lining up perfectly. I remember the prenup, she said. Good. Damien pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times. My lawyer is sending over the initial paperwork tomorrow. You'll have 72 hours to review it. If you contest anything, I'll make sure every divorce attorney in the city knows you're trying to steal from me. You'll be lucky to find representation. Natasha's hand had slipped from his. She stood very still, her face unreadable. Natasha will be moving into the master bedroom tonight, Damien continued. You can take the guest suite. Or better yet, you can go stay at one of those charity friends of yours. I'm sure someone will take pity on you. Victoria walked to the sink, rinsed her glass, placed it in the dishwasher. Her movements were precise, economical. When she turned back, Damien was watching her with something that looked almost like disappointment. You're not even going to fight, he said. After 12 years, you're just going to roll over. Would fighting change your mind? No. Then I won't waste the energy. Damien's jaw worked. You know what your problem is, Victoria? You've never had to work for anything. You've never had to struggle. You married me and stepped into a life most people only dream about, and you couldn't even appreciate it. You're hollow. Victoria dried her hands on a linen towel. Italian, hand-embroidered, a gift from a business associate whose name Damien wouldn't recognize. She folded it carefully, hung it back on its hook. I'll sleep in the guest suite, she said. I'll need a few days to make arrangements. You have 72 hours, Damien repeated. After that, I want you out. She nodded once, then walked past them. Natasha's perfume followed her into the hallway, vanilla and jasmine and desperation. Victoria's footsteps were silent on the runner that stretched down the corridor, a 19th-century Persian piece she'd bought at auction in London. Damien had never asked how much it cost. He'd never asked about any of it. Behind her, she heard Damien's voice, lower now, murmuring something to Natasha. The woman's laugh was nervous, high-pitched. Victoria reached the guest suite at the end of the hall. The door was heavy, solid walnut, the handle cool brass, shaped like a swan's neck. She'd chosen it herself from a salvage yard in Barcelona, had it shipped and installed while Damien was in Tokyo on business. Inside, the room was exactly as she remembered. Blue-grey walls, a queen bed with white linens, a writing desk by the window that overlooked the city. Minimalist, calm. Anonymous enough that Damien had never questioned why she spent money furnishing a room they never used. She didn't turn on the lights. The city provided enough illumination, filtering through the sheer curtains in shades of amber and silver. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, on her hands folded in her lap. The penthouse was silent. 73 floors up, the sounds of the street never reached them. Sometimes Victoria missed noise, real noise, the kind that reminded you other people existed. But Damien had wanted height, wanted separation, wanted everyone below him. She looked at her wedding ring. The diamond caught the city light, fracturing it into pieces. In 72 hours, this would be over, one way or another. Victoria Laurent stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out a leather overnight bag she kept on the top shelf. Inside was a burner phone, still in its packaging. A passport in a name Damien didn't know. $10,000 in cash, bundled in hundreds, and a single business card, cream-colored, with nothing but a phone number embossed in black. She'd prepared for this day, as she'd been preparing for 12 years. Natasha Reeves couldn't sleep. The master bedroom was obscene, 1,500 square feet, bigger than her first apartment. The bed was a custom California king, with a headboard upholstered in dove-gray suede. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, 1,200 thread count, so soft they felt almost liquid. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Damien was asleep beside her, one arm thrown across his face. He'd poured himself 3 fingers of scotch after Victoria disappeared down the hallway, drained it in 2 swallows, then pulled Natasha into the bedroom with hands that shook slightly. The sex had been urgent, almost angry. Afterward, he'd rolled over and passed out within minutes. Natasha stared at the ceiling. The bedroom had recessed lighting that dimmed automatically on a timer. She'd watched it fade from soft gold to almost nothing over the past hour. Now only the city lights remained, casting long shadows across the walls. She felt sick. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. When Damien had first approached her 6 months ago at that corporate mixer in Midtown, she'd thought he was just another bored executive looking for distraction. Handsome, confident, wearing a watch that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. He'd asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in the restructuring project she was leading for Meridian's Asia-Pacific division. They'd talked for 2 hours. He'd mentioned his wife once. "We have an understanding," he'd said, which Natasha had interpreted as the usual extramarital bullshit, as she'd almost walked away. But then he'd offered to introduce her to the managing director of Rothschild's private equity division, a connection that could change her career trajectory, and she'd stayed. The affair had been contained at first. Hotel rooms, his car, once, memorably, in his office at Laurent Capital after hours. He'd been careful, almost paranoid, about discretion. And then 2 weeks ago, he'd told her about his plan. "I want to divorce Victoria," he'd said. They were in a suite at the Peninsula, post-coital, sharing a bottle of wine that cost more than Natasha's monthly rent. But she won't go quietly. She'll try to take everything. "You have a prenup, don't you?" "Yes, but she's stubborn, entitled. She thinks she deserves half of what I've built just because she's been there for 12 years. and doing nothing. He'd refilled her glass. I need to force her hand, make her want to leave. How? By showing her she's replaceable, by bringing you home. Natasha had stared at him. You want me to what? Live with us, in the penthouse. I'll humiliate her enough that she'll sign the papers without a fight. He'd smiled, stroked her cheek. And when it's done, we'll be together. Really together. No more hiding. She should have said no. Should have walked out of that hotel room and blocked his number. But Damien had a way of making the impossible sound reasonable, the cruel sound justified. And there was a part of Natasha, a small, bitter part she didn't like to examine too closely, that wanted to believe Victoria Laurent deserved this. Any woman who could be married to someone like Damien and not appreciate it deserved to be replaced. But that was before she'd seen Victoria up close. Natasha rolled onto her side, careful not to wake Damien. Through the open bedroom door, she could see into the hallway. The penthouse was dark, quiet. She imagined Victoria in the guest suite, staring at the same ceiling, wondering how her life had imploded in the span of an hour. Except Victoria hadn't seemed like a woman whose life was imploding. She'd seemed calm, disturbingly calm, like being told your husband was divorcing you and moving his mistress into your home was only mildly inconvenient. Natasha slipped out of bed. Her red dress was a crumpled pile on the floor. She picked it up, pulled it on, without bothering with the zipper, then padded barefoot into the hallway. The marble was cold against her feet. She moved slowly, quietly, not sure what she was looking for. Evidence that Victoria was human, maybe. Evidence that this whole thing wasn't as horrible as it felt. The penthouse was a maze of rooms. She passed a library with built-in shelves that reached the ceiling, filled with what looked like first editions. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 20. A second living room with white furniture and abstract art that Natasha couldn't identify but suspected was worth a fortune. She found herself in what looked like a study, smaller than the other rooms, more intimate. A desk sat by the window, antique mahogany with brass pulls. The chair was upholstered in burgundy leather, worn soft in places from use. Behind the desk, framed degrees hung on the wall. Natasha stepped closer, squinting in the low light. The first was a bachelor's degree from Princeton, economics, summa cum laude. The name read Victoria Adelaide Thorne. Thorne, not Laurent. The second was a master's from Harvard Business School. The third was… Natasha's heart stopped. It was a certificate of incorporation. Meridian Global Holdings, filed in Delaware, dated 15 years ago. And at the bottom, in elegant script, founder and chief executive officer, Victoria Adelaide Thorne. Number. Natasha's hands had gone numb. She stared at the certificate, reading it again, then again, hoping she'd misread, but the words didn't change. She turned, scanning the rest of the study. There were photos on the shelves. Victoria shaking hands with world leaders. Victoria at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Victoria on the cover of Forbes, the headline partially visible. The Iron Queen, how Victoria Thorne built a $50 billion empire. Natasha's knees went weak, and she grabbed the edge of the desk for support. Meridian Global Holdings was her employer, the company she'd devoted the last 18 months of her life to, the company that employed 30,000 people across 40 countries, the company whose quarterly earnings reports moved markets, and Victoria Thorne, Victoria Laurent, was the founder, the CEO, the woman whose signature appeared on every major company document, the woman whose strategic decisions Natasha studied and admired and tried to emulate the woman whose home she'd just invaded, at the request of a man who apparently had no idea who he'd married. "Oh my God," Natasha whispered. "Oh my God." She backed away from the desk, her mind racing. How had Damien not known? How had he been married to Victoria Thorne for 12 years and not known? But even as she asked the question, she knew the answer, because Victoria had hidden it. She'd taken her husband's name, kept her work life completely separate. At Meridian, everyone called her Thorne. She was famously reclusive, avoiding press events, rarely appearing in public. Her executive team handled most external communications. Most employees had never even seen her in person. Natasha had been with the company for 18 months and had never met the CEO. She'd seen exactly 2 photos of Victoria Thorne. One on the company website, deliberately grainy and out of date, and one in that Forbes article from 8 years ago. Different hair, different styling, nothing that would make the connection obvious to someone who wasn't looking for it. But now that Natasha was looking, it was impossible to miss. The bone structure, the eyes, the way Victoria held herself, at that stillness that Natasha had mistaken for passivity, but was actually the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. She thought about the conservatory, the way Victoria had been pruning orchids at midnight like it was the most natural thing in the world. About the way she'd looked at Damien when he said, "My money." Not angry, not hurt, just aware. Natasha's stomach lurched. She was going to be sick. She ran for the bathroom, the one attached to the guest suite, because it was closer. She shoved open the door, barely making it to the toilet before her expensive dinner made a reappearance. She retched until there was nothing left, then slumped against the cool tile wall, shaking. The bathroom light flicked on. Victoria stood in the doorway, wearing the same linen pants and cashmere sweater from earlier. Her expression was neutral, clinical, like she was observing an interesting specimen. "There are towels in the cabinet," Victoria said quietly, "and mouthwash in the drawer." Natasha couldn't speak. She stared up at her boss, because that's what Victoria was, her boss, the woman who could end her career with a single phone call, and felt tears stream down her face. "I didn't know," Natasha managed. "I swear to God, I didn't know who you were." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Would it have mattered?" "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, it would have mattered. I would never, I'm not—" She couldn't finish. The sentences dissolved into gasping breaths. Victoria watched her for a long moment. Then she stepped into the bathroom, pulled a towel from the cabinet, and handed it to Natasha. "Clean yourself up," Victoria said. Then we should talk." The guest suite's sitting area was small, designed for privacy rather than entertaining. 2 armchairs faced each other across a low table, upholstered in fabric the color of sea foam. A reading lamp cast a circle of warm light. Beyond the windows, the city had started to wake. Garbage trucks rumbling down distant streets, the first delivery vans making their rounds. It was 4:47 a.m. Natasha sat in one chair, the towel clutched in her lap. She'd rinsed her mouth, splashed cold water on her face, but she still felt like she might fall apart at any moment. Across from her, Victoria sat with her legs crossed, hands folded in her lap, waiting. "How long have you known about Damien and me?" Natasha asked. Her voice was hoarse. "Since the beginning." 6 months? 6 months, Victoria confirmed. Natasha closed her eyes. Why didn't you fire me?" "You're good at your job." The Asia-Pacific Division's performance improved 17% in your first year. Why would I fire you for that? Because I'm sleeping with your husband. Victoria's expression didn't change. My husband's infidelity has nothing to do with your professional competence. The words were so calm, so matter-of-fact, that Natasha wanted to scream. How can you be so detached? Yes. Victoria looked out the window. Dawn was starting to break, turning the sky from black to deep purple. When you build something from nothing, you learn to separate emotion from strategy. Damien has been having affairs for 8 of our 12 years of marriage. You're the 7th woman. Natasha felt like she'd been punched. 7? 7 that I know of. There may have been others. Victoria's tone was conversational, like she was discussing the weather. Usually they last 3 to 6 months. Damien gets bored, or they get demanding, and it ends. I assumed you would follow the same pattern. But he wants to divorce you. This is different. Yes, Victoria agreed. This is different. Natasha leaned forward. Why did you stay? If you knew he was cheating, why didn't you leave? For the first time, something flickered across Victoria's face. Not pain exactly, something older, more complicated. I had my reasons, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. Victoria stood, walked to the window. In the growing light, she looked older than 40, or maybe just tired. Tell me about the plan, the one Damien explained to you. Natasha hesitated. He said you'd try to fight the divorce, take his money. He wanted to humiliate you into signing quickly. And you agreed to help. Natasha's throat closed. I didn't think you were real. Victoria turned. Excuse me? Not like that. I mean, I thought you were just a wife. Someone who existed in relation to him. He talked about you like you were this empty shell he was stuck with. No interests, no ambitions, no life of your own. I thought I was helping him escape a dead marriage. The words sounded pathetic, even as she said them. I didn't think about you as a person. But you do now. Natasha looked down at her hands. You're Victoria Thorne. You're the reason I got into this industry. When I was getting my MBA, we studied your acquisition of Rothschild Asia Pacific. The way you turned a failing division into a profit center in 18 months. It's taught in business schools. You're brilliant. And that matters? Of course it matters. Natasha's voice cracked. I'm sleeping in your bed, wearing clothes you probably paid for. I've been complicit in my own boss's humiliation. If this gets out, when this gets out, my career is over. Victoria returned to her chair. She moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to command space without demanding it. What do you think I should do, Natasha? What? You're in my position. Your husband has publicly betrayed you. Your employee has aided in that betrayal. What do you do? Natasha's mind raced. Fire me, immediately. Then destroy Damien in the divorce. Make an example of us both. Efficient, Victoria said. Straightforward. But short-sighted. How is that short-sighted? Because it assumes my goal is punishment. Victoria's eyes were steady, unreadable. What if my goal is something else? Like what? Justice, closure, freedom. She paused. Revenge is satisfying for about 30 seconds. After that, it's just expensive. Natasha shook her head. I don't understand you. Most people don't. Victoria stood again, this time moving toward the door. You should get some sleep. We both should. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. Wait. Natasha stood too quickly, had to grab the chair arm to steady herself. What happens now? Are you going to fire me? Victoria paused in the doorway. Do you want to be fired? No, but I'll understand if you do it. Then consider yourself on probation. We'll discuss the terms later. She started to leave, then stopped. Oh, one more question. Did you love him? Damien? Natasha opened her mouth, closed it. I don't know. I thought I might. But now you've seen what he's capable of. Yes. Victoria nodded, as if this confirmed something. Men like Damien see the world in terms of transactions. Everything is currency. Sex, power, loyalty. He thought he could trade you for his freedom, and trade his freedom for whatever comes next. He never considered that the people he was trading might have their own value. And do we? Natasha asked quietly. Have value, I mean. Everyone has value, Natasha. The question is whether you know your own. Victoria's smile was small, almost sad. Get some sleep. We'll talk after the sun comes up. She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Natasha stood alone in the guest suite, listening to the city wake up. Somewhere in the penthouse, Damien was still asleep, confident in his victory. He had no idea what he'd actually done, who he'd actually married, what was coming. Natasha thought about running. She could pack her things, call a car, disappear before Damien woke up. Start over somewhere else, some other city, some other company where her mistakes wouldn't follow her. But Victoria's question echoed in her mind. Do you know your own value? Natasha wasn't sure, but she was starting to think she wanted to find out. She pulled out her phone, opened her email. There was a message from Victoria's executive assistant, sent at 5:03 a.m., marked urgent. The subject line read, Emergency Board Meeting, Friday, 9 a.m. Your attendance mandatory. Friday was 2 days away. Yet Natasha had a feeling she knew what the meeting would be about, and who would be there. She climbed into the bed. The sheets still smelled like storage, like Victoria had said, and pulled the covers up to her chin. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion won eventually, dragging her down into restless dreams where she stood in boardrooms she didn't recognize, answering questions she couldn't hear, while Victoria Thorne watched from the head of the table with those calm, knowing eyes. Damien Laurent woke at 6:30 a.m. to find Natasha's side of the bed empty. He sat up, disoriented, taking in the unfamiliar light streaming through the windows. Then he remembered the penthouse, Victoria, the beginning of his new life. He smiled. The bathroom door was closed, water running behind it. Natasha, showering. Damien stretched, joints popping, and then reached for his phone on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from his lawyer. A text, paperwork ready, can deliver this afternoon, perfect. He typed back, bring it by at 2. I'll have Victoria sign today. The water shut off. A moment later, Natasha emerged wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping onto the marble floor. She looked pale, shadows under her eyes like she hadn't slept. Morning, Damien said. Come back to bed. I need to get to work. Her voice was flat. Call in sick. We should celebrate. Celebrate what? She moved to the closet. Victoria's closet, technically, though most of the clothes inside were things Damien had bought. Natasha pulled out a black dress, held it up, put it back. Our freedom. The start of everything. Damien got out of bed, crossed to her, slid his arms around her waist from behind. This time next week, Victoria will be gone. It'll just be us. Natasha went rigid under his touch. Damien, I need to tell you something. What? She turned to face him, still wrapped in the towel. Do you know what your wife does for a living? She doesn't do anything. That's the whole problem. Damien released her, irritated at the change of subject. She sits in this penthouse all day doing nothing. You're sure about that? Of course I'm sure. I've been married to her for 12 years. Natasha's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. You have no idea, do you? No idea about what? About who she is, what she's built, what you've just done. Damien's irritation crystallized into anger. What are you talking about? Natasha pulled away, started getting dressed with jerky, frantic movements. I can't do this. I can't be here when you find out. I need to go. Natasha, he grabbed her arm. Stop. Tell me what's going on. Victoria is Victoria Thorne. The name meant nothing. So Meridian Global Holdings, the company I work for, she's the founder, the CEO, the woman whose portrait hangs in our lobby, the woman who built a $50 billion empire from a startup in her Princeton dorm room. Natasha yanked her arm free. You married one of the most powerful women in the world and somehow never knew. Damien stared at her. That's insane. Is it? Have you ever actually asked Victoria what she does all day? Have you ever looked at the mail that comes here? The phone calls she takes? Or did you just assume she was sitting around spending your money? He stopped. The truth was, he'd never asked. Victoria had a home office she disappeared into sometimes. She traveled occasionally, always vague about where she was going, but she'd never corrected him when he referred to his money, his properties, his empire. She's been lying, Damien said. If what you're saying is true, she's been lying for 12 years. Or you've been not listening for 12 years. Natasha finished dressing, grabbed her purse. I have to go. I have a meeting. What meeting? An emergency board meeting. Friday. Your wife called it. She stopped at the bedroom door. Damien, I like you. Or I did. But you need to get a lawyer. A good one. Because whatever you think is about to happen, you're wrong. She left. Damien stood alone in the master bedroom, his reflection staring back at him from the mirror above the dresser. He looked the same as always, successful and confident, in control. But something cold had settled in his chest. He pulled on clothes, stalked through the penthouse. Victoria's study door was closed. He tried the handle. Locked. Through the thick wood, he couldn't hear anything. The library. He'd been in there 100 times, but never really looked. Now, he scanned the shelves. First editions, like he'd always assumed, but also journals, academic publications, business quarterlies, legal reviews, an entire shelf dedicated to corporate law, another to international finance, and photos. So many photos he'd never noticed because he'd never looked. Victoria at a G20 summit. Victoria accepting an award from the United Nations. Victoria on a panel with the CEOs of Amazon, Google, Apple. In every photo, she looked exactly like she looked now. Calm, composed, powerful, and just wearing different clothes. Damien's phone rang. His lawyer. Mr. Laurent, we have a problem. What kind of problem? I've been going through the prenup to prepare the divorce paperwork. There's a clause I missed in the initial review. Damien's jaw clenched. What clause? A disclosure requirement. Any assets acquired or managed during the marriage must be disclosed to both parties within 30 days of acquisition. Failure to disclose voids the prenup's protection on those assets. So your wife has been making disclosures every month, like clockwork, for 12 years, to an email address you apparently never check. The documentation shows she's been transparent about every asset, every investment, every business holding. His lawyer's voice was grim. Mr. Laurent, According to these documents, but your wife owns 93% of everything. The penthouse, the properties, the investment accounts, even your stake in Laurent Capital is actually held through one of her shell companies. You've been living in her house, spending her money for over a decade. The phone slipped from Damien's hand, clattered on the floor. No, that was impossible. He'd built Laurent Capital from nothing. Except he hadn't, had he? The seed money had come from Victoria. A loan from her family, she'd said. He'd paid it back within 5 years, or thought he had. But if Victoria had been playing a longer game? The study door opened. Victoria stood there in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, diamond studs in her ears. She looked like she was heading to a board meeting. She probably was. "Good morning, Damien." Her voice was professional, yet distant. "We need to talk about Friday." Friday? The Meridian Global Holdings Annual Investor Gala. It's at the Plaza. Black tie. You've attended the last 5 years as my spouse, and I'd prefer to maintain consistency. She checked her watch. A Patek Philippe he'd assumed he'd bought her, but now suspected she'd bought herself. "I've had your tuxedo cleaned. It's hanging in the closet." "You want me to attend a gala?" "I want you to attend the gala. Meridian's investors expect it. The optics of a separation right now would raise questions I'm not prepared to answer." She tilted her head. "Unless you'd prefer I make a statement about our impending divorce. I'm sure the financial press would be interested." Damien's mind raced. And if what his lawyer said was true, if Victoria owned everything, then a public divorce announcement would be disastrous. His reputation, his business relationships, everything he'd built was predicated on the assumption that he was successful in his own right. "You've been lying to me," he said. "I've been transparent. You chose not to look." Victoria pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket, held it out. "The gala invitation. +1 is optional, though I'd recommend you attend alone. Natasha will be there in her professional capacity, and it might be awkward." He didn't take the envelope. "What do you want?" "I want you at the gala. I want you to smile for the cameras. I want you to play the role of the supportive husband one last time." Her eyes were cold. "And then, after this is done, I want you to sign the divorce papers I'll be presenting. Not the ones your lawyer prepared. Mine." "And if I refuse?" Victoria's smile was razor-thin. "Then I'll make sure every business contact you have knows exactly how you've spent the last 12 years. Living off your wife's wealth while having affair after affair. Bringing your mistresses into a home you don't own. Attempting to defraud me out of assets you never possessed." She stepped closer. "I've been patient, Damien. I've been generous. I've let you play pretend because it was easier than dealing with your ego. But my patience has limits." Damien wanted to hit her, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything except stand there, feeling like the walls were closing in. "Why?" he managed. "Why did you let me think that you were important, that you were the one in control?" Victoria's expression softened, just slightly. "Because 12 years ago, I was 28 and exhausted. I'd just taken Meridian public. I was working 100-hour weeks, and you were charming and uncomplicated, and you didn't want anything from me except to be adored." She paused. "I thought it might be nice to be normal for a while, to have a husband who saw me as just a woman, not a business opportunity. It was a miscalculation. You used me. We used each other. You wanted a beautiful wife and a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your own. I wanted someone who wouldn't interfere with my work. It was transactional from the beginning." Victoria dropped the envelope on the hall table. "Friday, 8 p.m. Don't be late." She walked past him toward the elevator that led directly to the building's private garage. Her heels clicked on the marble, precise and final. "Victoria," Damien called. She paused but didn't turn around. "What happens after the gala?" "After the gala, you sign the papers, you leave, and we never speak again." "And if I fight you?" Now she did turn, and her expression was colder than anything Damien had ever seen. "Then I'll show you what it means to go to war with someone who's actually built something worth protecting. Do you really want to find out how that ends?" The elevator doors opened. Victoria stepped inside, pressed the button for the garage. The doors slid shut, leaving Damien alone in the hallway. His phone was still on the library floor. He picked it up, looked at the screen. 17 new emails, and all from addresses he didn't recognize. All with the same subject line: Meridian Global Holdings, disclosure of assets, month/year. He opened the most recent one. It was a detailed spreadsheet listing every major financial holding. Property deeds, investment accounts, business partnerships. Everything was there. Everything had always been there, and he'd never once looked. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom held 300 people comfortably. Tonight, it held 400, and the energy was electric. Crystal chandeliers threw light across tables draped in ivory silk. A string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner, barely audible over the buzz of conversation. This was Meridian Global Holdings' annual investor gala, and everyone who mattered was here. Damien Laurent stood near the bar, nursing his second scotch and trying to look like he belonged. He'd arrived alone, as Victoria had recommended. The tuxedo fit perfectly. He'd worn it to a dozen events just like this one. But tonight, everything felt wrong. The collar too tight, the room too hot, the eyes of strangers sliding over him with barely concealed curiosity. Because they knew. Not the details, maybe, but they knew something had shifted. Damien Laurent. A man approached, 60-something, silver hair, custom suit that probably cost more than a car. "Paul Hendricks, we met at the Singapore conference 2 years ago." Damien forced a smile, shook the offered hand. "Of course, good to see you again. I didn't realize you were connected to Meridian. Victoria keeps her personal life remarkably private." "We're married," Damien said, the words tasting like ash. Hendrix's eyebrows rose. "Are you? How fascinating. I've been trying to get a meeting with Victoria for 6 months. You must introduce us." Before Damien could respond, a ripple went through the crowd. Conversations paused. Heads turned toward the ballroom entrance. Victoria had arrived. She wore midnight blue, a gown that looked simple until the light hit it and revealed thousands of tiny crystals embedded in the fabric. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. Minimal jewelry, the diamond studs, a platinum bracelet, her wedding ring. She moved through the crowd like water, stopping to greet investors, shaking hands, laughing at jokes Damien couldn't hear. She looked nothing like the woman who'd pruned orchids in a conservatory. She looked like exactly what she was, a queen surveying her kingdom. "Ah, remarkable woman," Hendricks murmured. "Built all this from nothing. Started in a dorm room with a laptop and an idea. Now look." He gestured at the ballroom. 50 billion in assets, 30,000 employees, and she's still only 40. Damien drained his scotch. Victoria spotted him across the room. Their eyes met. She said something to the investor beside her, then excused herself and started walking toward him. The crowd parted automatically. "Darling." She air-kissed his cheek. A perfect performance. Up close, he could smell her perfume. something expensive and subtle that he'd never noticed before. "Thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" Her smile didn't falter. "There's always a choice. You chose correctly." She took his arm, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a handcuff. "Come, there are people I want you to meet." She led him through the ballroom, introducing him to investors, board members, international executives. At each introduction, Damien felt smaller. These people knew Victoria's history, her accomplishments. When they looked at him, he could see the question in their eyes. What does she see in you? He'd asked himself the same thing for 12 years. Now he knew the answer. Nothing. She'd seen nothing in him except a convenient cover. "Victoria," a woman's voice sharp with delight. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You always skip the speeches." Damien turned. Natasha stood there in a forest green gown, her hair styled differently than he'd ever seen it. Professional, polished, nothing like the woman who'd trembled in his arms 6 months ago. "Natasha." Victoria's tone was warm, but distant. I wouldn't miss your presentation. The board is very impressed with your Q4 numbers." "I had good support." Natasha's eyes flicked to Damien for a fraction of a second, then away. "The team in Singapore did most of the heavy lifting. Effective delegation is a skill. You've mastered it." Victoria checked her watch. "We should take our seats. The presentations start in 10 minutes." They moved toward the front of the ballroom, where a raised platform had been set up. Tables were arranged in concentric circles, the closest reserved for board members and C-suite executives. Victoria guided Damien to a table in the front row. Natasha was already seated 3 tables back, in the section reserved for vice presidents. She looked terrified. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. Victoria stepped up to the microphone. Good evening," she said, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight. For those who don't know me," a ripple of laughter. Everyone knew her. "I'm Victoria Thorne, founder and CEO of Meridian Global Holdings." Damien noticed she didn't say Laurent. She'd never used his name professionally. "Tonight, we celebrate a record year. Revenue up 23%. International expansion into 12 new markets. 3 major acquisitions that have already shown significant ROI. Victoria's voice was clear, confident, commanding. "But more than numbers, we celebrate the people who made this possible. Our employees, our partners, our investors who believed in us when we were nothing more than a business plan and a dream." Applause. Damien clapped mechanically. This company was built on a simple principle: value people, and they will create value. Victoria paused, letting the words settle. But that principle only works if we're honest about who we are and what we bring to the table. Dishonesty, in business, in relationships, in life, always has a cost. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Which brings me to tonight's other purpose. Victoria pulled a folder from the podium's hidden shelf. "As many of you know, I've maintained a very private personal life. I believed that separation was healthy, that my work and my marriage could exist in parallel without intersection. I was wrong." Damien's hands had gone cold. "My husband, Damien Laurent, is here tonight." Victoria gestured toward him, and every eye in the room swiveled. "Damien runs a boutique investment firm called Laurent Capital, a firm I funded 12 years ago, a firm I've quietly supported through strategic partnerships and investor connections, a firm that, according to the paperwork, I technically own." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I mention this not to embarrass my husband." Victoria's eyes found Damien's, and they were merciless. But to make a point about accountability. For 12 years, I allowed Damien to believe he'd built something independently. I thought it was kind, a way to protect his pride. Instead, I enabled a fundamental dishonesty, and that dishonesty festered until it poisoned everything. Damien wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but 300 people were watching, and the exits were too far away. Last week, Damien asked me for a divorce. He brought another woman, a Meridian employee, into our home to humiliate me into signing quickly. He believed I was a burden, a boring housewife with no purpose beyond spending his money. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut. He believed this because I let him, because I was too tired, or too proud, or too cowardly to correct him. Someone coughed. The sound echoed in the silence. So tonight, I'm correcting the record. Publicly, completely. Victoria opened the folder. Everything Damien believes he owns, the penthouse, the properties, the investment accounts, is mine. Legally, financially, irrevocably mine. Laurent Capital exists because I chose to fund it. It succeeds because I chose to support it. And as of tomorrow morning, I will be dissolving my support entirely. Victoria, Damien stood, his voice strangled. Sit down, Damien. It wasn't a request. Damien sat. I'm announcing tonight that Laurent Capital's primary investment partnerships with Meridian Global will not be renewed. Additionally, I'll be informing our investor network that the company no longer has my backing. Make of that what you will. Victoria closed the folder. As for our marriage, it's over. Divorce papers will be filed Monday. I'm keeping everything I brought into the marriage and everything I earned during it. Damien will leave with what he came with. Nothing. The room erupted. Investors turned to each other, voices rising. Phones appeared, fingers flying across screens. This wasn't just gossip. This was news that would move markets. Victoria raised a hand, and the room quieted again. One more thing. Natasha Reeves, please stand. 3 tables back, Natasha rose slowly. She looked like she might faint. Ms. Reeves has been with Meridian for 18 months. In that time, she's proven herself to be an exceptional leader and strategist. She's also proven to be human, capable of poor judgment, of being manipulated, of making mistakes. Victoria's voice softened slightly. Miss Reeves, you're being reassigned. Effective Monday, you'll be heading our new division in London. It's a promotion, with a significant raise and full relocation package. You can accept or decline. Either way, your employment with Meridian continues. Natasha's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I accept. Victoria nodded. Good. You'll report directly to me for the first 6 months. Consider it probation. Prove you've learned from this, and you'll have a long career here. Disappoint me, and you won't. I understand. Excellent. Victoria stepped back from the podium. That concludes my remarks. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. She walked off the platform, ignoring the explosion of noise behind her. Damien watched her navigate the crowd, investors trying to catch her attention, reporters shouting questions she didn't answer. She moved toward a side exit, flanked by security, and then she was gone. Damien sat alone at the table as the ballroom dissolved into chaos around him. His phone was ringing, his lawyer probably, or his business partner, or any of the dozen people whose calls he suddenly couldn't face. He let it ring. Paul Hendricks appeared beside him. That was brutal. Yes. Do you need anything? A lawyer? A drink? I need to not be here. Hendricks nodded. The side exit leads to a service corridor. You can slip out without dealing with the press. Damien took the advice. He found the corridor, followed it past kitchen staff and event workers who didn't give him a second glance. Outside, the night air was cold, shocking after the ballroom's heat. He stood on the sidewalk, watching traffic flow past, and felt completely untethered. His phone rang again. This time, he answered, "Mr. Laurent, we have a serious problem." His lawyer's voice was tight with panic. "I know. Do you? Because I've just been informed that every asset in your name is being frozen pending investigation. Your personal accounts, your business accounts, everything. There's a clause in your original funding agreement with your wife that allows her to recall the investment if the company is found to be operating under false pretenses." "What false pretenses?" "That you were the primary owner, that you built it independently, that you had the expertise and capital to justify investor confidence." The lawyer paused. "Mr. Laurent, she's destroying you, systematically, legally, and there's nothing we can do to stop it." Damien ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the city move around him. Eventually, a car pulled up, a black sedan with tinted windows. The back door opened. Victoria sat inside, still in her midnight blue gown. "Get in." He almost didn't. Almost walked away, found a bar, drank until he couldn't remember his own name. But the alternative was standing on a street corner with nowhere to go, so he got in. The car pulled away from the curb. "Where are we going?" Damien asked. "I'm going home." "You're going to the airport." Victoria handed him an envelope. "There's a ticket to Los Angeles, first class, and a hotel reservation for 2 weeks, and a check for $100,000. Damien stared at the envelope. "Why?" "Because I'm not cruel. I'm ending our marriage, Damien. I'm taking back what's mine, but I'm not leaving you destitute." She looked out the window. "You'll need to rebuild, find real work, not the pretend empire you've been running. Learn what it means to actually earn something. The 100,000 will get you started. And if I refuse, then you can try to survive on your own reputation. See how far that gets you after tonight." Victoria's voice was clinical, detached. "You have skills, Damien. You're good with people. Charming. You could have built something real if you'd ever actually tried, but you were too comfortable. I'm too convinced you deserved everything you had." The car pulled up to the airport's departure terminal. "This is your stop," Victoria said. Damien looked at her. Really looked. At the woman he'd lived with for 12 years without ever seeing. "Did you ever love me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I loved who I thought you could be. But you never became that person, and I was too busy to notice until it was too late." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." She reached across him, opened his door. "Goodbye, Damien." He got out. The door closed. The car pulled away, taillights disappearing into traffic. Damien stood there with the envelope in his hand, watching until he couldn't see the car anymore. Then he turned and walked into the terminal, toward whatever came next. 6 months later, and Victoria Laurent, now Victoria Thorne again, legally and completely, stood in her conservatory at midnight, pruning orchids. The penthouse was quiet. Hers. Finally and irrevocably hers. The divorce had been finalized in record time. Damien hadn't fought. He'd signed the papers, taken his 100,000, and disappeared to California. According to the private investigator Victoria had hired, purely for due diligence, he'd gotten a job at a mid-tier investment firm, entry-level. He was living in a studio apartment in Culver City and driving a used Honda. It was more than he deserved, less than he'd hoped for, exactly what he'd earned. Natasha Reeves had moved to London and was thriving. The European division's numbers were up 32% under her leadership. She sent monthly reports, detailed and thorough, clearly terrified of disappointing Victoria again. They'd spoken twice since the gala, once about business, once about everything else. Natasha had cried, apologized, promised to be better. Victoria had listened, then told her the past was done and only the future mattered. Time would tell if that was true. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from her head of security. Package delivered. Ground floor. Requires signature. She set down the pruning shears, took the private elevator down 73 floors. The lobby was empty except for the night doorman and a delivery person with a large wooden crate. Miss Thorne, the delivery person held out a tablet. Sign here, please. Victoria signed. The crate was wheeled into the elevator, back up to the penthouse. Inside the conservatory, she pried open the crate carefully. Unpacking material fell away to reveal an orchid. Rare, extraordinary. The blooms a deep purple that looked almost black in certain lights. The card read, "For the woman who taught me the difference between surviving and growing. Thank you." N.R. Victoria smiled. A real smile, small and genuine. She found a place for the orchid near the windows where it would get morning light but not too much heat. Then she returned to her pruning, to the careful work of cutting away what was dead and encouraging what could still grow. The city stretched out below her. 10 million lights, 10 million lives. Somewhere out there, Damien was learning what it meant to build something real. Somewhere else, Natasha was proving she could be more than her mistakes. And here, 73 floors above it all, Victoria Thorne was exactly where she'd always been, in control, unburdened, and finally, completely free. She picked up her shears and got back to work. There was always more to tend, always more to grow. That was the thing about empires. They required constant care, constant attention, constant willingness to cut away what no longer served. But Victoria had always been good at that. She'd been doing it for 12 years. And that's how you dismantle a man who thought he owned you, with receipts, patience, and a lawyer who actually read the fine print. Here's my blessing for you. May you always have the foresight to protect yourself, the strength to stay calm when chaos surrounds you, and the satisfaction of watching karma work overtime on your behalf. Now, and here's my challenge to you, and I mean this genuinely, if this story made you feel anything, anger at Damien's arrogance, satisfaction at Victoria's victory, hope that justice sometimes actually wins, then prove it. Drop a like, subscribe if you believe more stories like this need to be told. And here's the real test. Comment one word that describes how you'd handle being in Victoria's position. Just one word. I'll be reading every single one, and the most creative answer might just inspire the next story. Don't let this be the story you watched and forgot. Make it the one you were part of.